So I'm sitting here contemplating life, as you do, and just wondering, what's it going to be like going back to van life when I leave this place? So if you're relatively new to my videos and haven't quite worked out what I'm all about, I'm Jason. I'm a retired mechanical engineer. I decided to quit work at about 53 years old, so it's been a couple of years now that I've been out on my own. I wouldn't describe myself as a rich person, but I would describe myself as very frugal with my money. And that's kind of the key to me retiring early. I've got quite a bit of time now where I have to live before my superannuation becomes available and I can access that extra money. So I built myself a campervan, which I've been living in for the last 2 years. But in my long-term goals, one of those goals has always been to have a motorhome and just live a nomadic life around the country, but also I've always wondered what it would be like to live in Asia for extended periods. So in this video, basically I'm just going to go through some of my thought processes, how I'm feeling about where I am, what I'm doing, how I feel about going back to Australia, living in the van again. Anyway, hang around to the end and we'll see if I can work out where I want to be. So something I should get straight right from the start is that living in a camper van wasn't something I chose out of convenience or necessity. This has been a long-term dream of mine for quite some time. I've had plans to do this for probably about the last 20 years. A lot of this comes down to my personality, and I kind of like moving around. Even when I've lived in houses, I've lived in a lot of houses. I've moved around quite a lot. I think the longest I've ever stayed in one place has been 7 years. The next piece of the puzzle, of course, is the fact that things have to be cost-effective. Now, I don't have a stack of money. I can't live a very grand lifestyle, and that's why van life appeals to me. It gives me that flexibility to move around, see lots of different places, to be mobile, but also it can be quite cost effective, and I'm living very cheaply in the van, or at least I think I'm living very cheaply. Throughout my working life, I've visited China and Southeast Asia quite a few times, like a lot of times. I've had about 40 overseas trips now, and I am quite aware of the cost of living. I know it's quite a cost-effective place to live. I've also done a fair bit of viewing on YouTube, bit of study into various places to live. And really what I've done, I've narrowed down to kind of 3 places which I think would be suitable for me, and that's Vietnam, Thailand and China. So first on the feasibility, we've really got to look at how feasible it is for me to stay in these countries for any extended period of time. And really Thailand comes out on top of that. There is a ability to get a retirement visa where you can stay long term, and that's probably the best option out of the 3 countries. Unfortunately, recently a lot of the rules have been changing on the Thai retirement visas, and it's become pretty unstable and unpredictable. A lot of the expats have had their bank accounts frozen, and just the other week while I was here, I actually came past a bank early in the morning and there was about a dozen Westerners standing outside waiting to get inside, no doubt screaming to try and get their money. Other countries aren't as flexible though, and this is the biggest problem, right? So Vietnam, you can get a 3-month visa, and that's the longest you can stay there. Now China, at the moment, you can get a 1-month visa, or you can basically have visa-free entry for 1 month, but that's about the longest period you can stay there. Now, I'm in a fortunate situation with China because Lexi and I are a couple. We can get a family reunion visa because she still has family in China, and that means I can stay in China for 3 months as well. So what it's kind of looking like for me is that if I decide to stay in Southeast Asia, I'll be floating around between countries for a maximum of 3 months at any one time. Thailand has visa-free entry, and you can stay for 2 months on that, and then you can request a 1-month extension, so that blows it out to 3 months. So between those, I would have 3 months in Thailand, 3 months Vietnam, and 3 months China. So what does my life look like here? What's the pattern of things? And I guess basically, well, the weather's really hot, so I'm getting up in the mornings, just doing a bit of stuff, wandering around, going for a bike ride. It's not really any different between here and China. I was basically following the same sort of pattern, just get out in the morning while it's cool enough to do stuff, do a few things, come back to the hotel, rest, have a bit of a sleep maybe, head out for lunch, spend probably an hour or so wandering around trying to find somewhere to eat for lunch. And then by like 1:30, it's definitely time to take shelter from the heat, and then just wait out until the evening when things cool down a little. It's not totally dissimilar to how I live my life in the van anyway. I'll go out for a bike ride in the morning and then take it easy for the rest of the day, and then I guess the main difference is that I don't go out wandering around at night when I'm in the van. I basically just lock myself in the van, and that's that. I don't go anywhere for the rest of the day. Probably my biggest limiting factor about, particularly about being in Thailand at the moment, is the lack of transportation. It was always my plan to get my motorbike licence, and therefore I could get an international driver's licence and ride a motorbike when I came over here. Never actually happened. I wasn't quite planning on coming here this time. China was pretty easy because I managed to hire electric bikes and get around pretty easily there, plus the public transport is really, really good. Here, public transport, not quite as good. We have these little songtels here. It's one way of getting around, not the best though. Cost of food was a bit of a shock when I first got into Thailand compared to China. Places like this were quite expensive, sort of 2 to 3 times more expensive than what I was getting in China. The reality is that these little night markets are actually a bit of a tourist trap. I have found that now that if you get into shopping centre food courts, or even some of the smaller street vendors and smaller, family-run restaurants in the back streets, prices are very comparable to China. And the food in the food courts is actually really damn good. I've got some... Oh man, I'm just continually eating at food courts at the moment and getting some really nice food. Cutting to Australia, even making my own meals, when I cook my own batch of food for lunch, it's about $3.50, $4.50 per serving. Plus I've got to go to the trouble of cooking it. If I want to buy something, if I get a lunchtime special at an Asian restaurant, it's $13 to $15. That's in the cities. Once I'm outside the cities, you struggle to get lunchtime specials. $16, $17, $18 for a meal. The concept of cooking is going to be something I'm going to struggle with going back to when I get back in the van. I don't enjoy it, and the convenience here of just going out and buying something new every day is a big draw card. I also spend about $2,300, $2,400, probably $2,500 each year on rego, insurance, maintenance for the van. So that's about $200 a month. That with the fuel is basically about a $550, say $600, if I overinflate my numbers, to $600 a month to keep and live in the van. If I can find $20 a night hotels, then that's $600 a month. In Thailand, not going to find that. We're talking $30 to $40 a night in hotels here. So obviously here is a bit more expensive. But China, not a problem at all. The other solution to that is to find longer term rentals to get something for several months, 3-4 months or something like that, and get a better deal. In Thailand, you hear a lot about 6-month rentals. You can do that, and that kind of becomes quite cost effective. So I'd save quite a bit of money if I did that, but then that means locking yourself into a certain area for 6 months. I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of commitment. Probably the biggest thing about van life is the freedom to be able to come and go, just do whatever you want, head wherever you want to, at least within the country, and within the limitations of your fuel budget, and within the limitations of the law where you're allowed to actually stay, and also within the limitations of the locals that may or may not keep you awake at night. One thing I'm really enjoying about staying in the hotels is the low stress of it all, apart from the fact that it was cockroaches. But up until now it's been good. There's just none of that being on edge at night, struggling to find somewhere to stay. Okay, there is still a struggle to find somewhere to stay, because every now and then you're searching for hotels and flicking through the internet sites, and that takes quite a few hours. Probably takes me as long to find a hotel as it does to find a campsite. But on the plus side, usually once I find a hotel, I've got several nights where I can just sit here and relax and not have to stress over things. On the negative side, I am stuck in a particular hotel for however long I book it for. At the moment, I've only been booking for like a week at a time, and that gives me the opportunity then just to move on somewhere else if I'm bored of this particular area. And it's not totally different to what I do in the van anyway. I do sort of go to an area and stay there for quite a while, and once I get bored I move on. I think China offers a lot more opportunities in that respect, that there is a lot more scenic places to look at, and I like the scenery. I like scenic life, being able to get into mountains, waterfalls, all that sort of business. This sort of thing, it's fun for a while, but it's not going to appeal to me in the long term. So definitely staying in a city like this for 6 months, for example, if I was to rent a condo for that length of time, I think it would wear thin pretty quickly. I just spent a couple of months in Shanghai, and having the bike and being able to go for a ride around the area there, having the little car and being able to get out a little bit further, that was great, and that made it enjoyable. I didn't mind that at all. But I think long term, if I was spending any more than a couple of months, I would start to get bored, and I really did like to be able to get out to the couple of other cities that I went to, get out into the mountains and check that out. That was really nice. I certainly have a fair bit of sitting around wondering what I'm going to do next, just thinking, what am I going to find that's interesting to do? But in reality, when I think about it, I used to do it in the van too, I used to quite often sit there thinking, what am I going to do next? And it'd be like, look, I want to go and visit friends or something in a few days' time, so I've got to stay in this town, which means I've got 3 or 4 days where I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think no matter where I am, there are going to be boring times, no matter what I'm doing. You can't have 100% stimulation all the time. It's just not realistic. ideally I'd like that, but then I don't think my body can keep up anyway. To be able to get out mountain biking every single day would be perfect. I'd love to be doing that. But my body can't handle that, you know, I just need days off. Same with walking around exploring towns, cities, you know. When I was in Songshan back in China, I only managed 2 days of walking, and I had about 4 or 5 days where I was basically completely stuffed and couldn't walk anymore. So that was just time sitting in the hotel and just walking around the streets. So can I draw any form of conclusions from any of this discussion? I'm on my last 3 days in Thailand now, so I've been staying in Pattaya for about 3 weeks. Spent a little bit of time over on that island out there, but other than that, I've been pretty much in the same spot. Kind of part of the purpose was for me to scope out this whole thing that I'm going through right now. You know, is this sort of life for me? Can I handle sitting in this one place for this length of time? Do I like this city? You know, do I like being in Thailand for this long? My immediate decision to make is, what do I do next? As I said, I'm supposed to be getting out of it in 3 days. I had flights booked to go back to China, and I was tossing up whether to actually do that or just go straight back to Australia. You know, there wasn't much of a cost difference for me just to forfeit the flight and head back to Australia. But it's cold there, so I've decided, well, I'm going to stay here in the warm weather probably for another month or so, and then I'll head back to Australia. I'm going back to China. I think I've probably had enough of Thailand, or at least Pattaya at this point in time. There's not really enough here to engage me for this length of time, and I think that kind of answers some of my questions. You know, do I want to be in this one place for, you know, like a 3-month or even a 6-month rental on an apartment? I think the answer is no. Certainly not at this point in my life. It's not something I want to be doing. How am I going to feel about van life when I get back to Australia? Well, I guess we'll just find that out, won't we? So, you know, there's certainly things I'm going to miss about this, and I think food is one of the big ones. You know, the food in Thailand is awesome. I do like the food in China as well, but I like the convenience and the cost effectiveness of it all. I like not having to cook for myself. I like that I can just go out to restaurants and eat at restaurants every single day, and it costs me less than what it would to make my own meals back in Australia. I miss the bike riding. With my current lifestyle, just moving around hotels and not staying for very long, having a bike with me is a bit of a burden more than anything else. Trying to take it on public transport's a bit of a headache. So, you know, it can be done. I have travelled with bikes before, but it's a little bit fiddly. And maybe in the future that's something I need to look at doing, bringing a bike with me to places like this. And then I would be a little more engaged and probably more open to staying for a slightly longer period in one spot. But I think probably the big cruncher is the fact that I like a bit of variability in my life, and doing the one thing all the time just to me gets a little bit boring. So, you know, even though I've been living in a van and, you know, living most people's dreams, I need a bit more variety, you know, and coming over to Asia for a while has been really good. Certainly getting away from Australia through winter has been awesome. So I think probably what I'm thinking at the moment is that I'm going to head back to Australia. I'll get through summer in the van. I'll max out everything I can in that lifestyle. And when it starts heading back to winter again, I'll probably consider coming back over to Asia and heading back to the warmer climate. Yeah, there's still parts of Australia I haven't explored yet, and they are the more northern, hotter parts anyway. So maybe I'll spend a bit of winter up there and in Queensland, Northern Territory, things like that. I don't know, so many options. But I think at the end of the day, you know, it's an interesting thought experiment. You know, it's a bit of fun to go through all this, and I'm just going to play it by ear and see how I go when I get back. Yeah, one thing I need to keep in mind is that I am in a very fortunate position where I've managed to retire early. I've managed to keep my cost of living down very low, and then I can live this sort of lifestyle. You know, I think travelling overseas once a year or twice a year or whatever is probably sustainable in the long term, as long as I get cheap airfares. And I have the flexibility to do that. You know, I'm not tied to holiday periods or anything like that, so I can just look around for cheap fares and I can make those moves whenever I can afford to. Anyway, look, I think that's probably enough talking from me today. I hope you found this interesting and entertaining and possibly not too boring, but look, I'll be back sometime in the not too distant future and bring you some more stuff. I don't know what, might be interesting, might not be. Thanks for watching, catch you all later.